The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned shopping mall where Kestrel Hartwell had made her unlikely home. 3 years had passed since the world ended, since the dead rose and devoured civilization in a matter of weeks, yet she still woke each dawn with the stubborn belief that humanity could claw its way back from the brink. The skylights above the old food court leaked amber light onto makeshift gardens where tomatoes and beans grew in salvaged planters, a testament to the small community's determination to nurture life in a world consumed by death. Kestrel moved silently through the corridors, her boots making barely a whisper against the cracked tiles. The mall had become sanctuary for 37 survivors, each wing repurposed into living quarters, workshops, and storage areas. The old Spencer's had been converted into a medical bay where Zara Moonwhisper tended to the sick and injured with supplies scavenged from abandoned hospitals. The former Radio Shack served as Thane Ironwood's workshop, where the bearded engineer worked tirelessly to maintain their generators and water filtration systems. As Kestrel approached the security office that served as their command center, she could already hear the heated discussion within. Orion Nightstrike's voice carried through the doorway, sharp with frustration. "The herds are getting larger, Kestrel. Yesterday's sweep counted over 200 rotters moving west along the interstate. They're following the sound of our generators." Through the reinforced glass windows, Kestrel could see the concern etched on every face around the table. Caspian Silverforge, the oldest among them at 62, stroked his graying beard thoughtfully. Beside him, 17-year-old Bellamy Stormwright fidgeted with nervous energy, her bright eyes darting between the adults as if searching for reassurance none of them could provide. "We've always known this place was temporary," Kestrel said as she entered, her voice carrying the calm authority that had kept them alive through countless crises. "The question isn't whether we'll have to move, but where we'll go next." Thane looked up from the hand-drawn maps spread across the table, his calloused fingers tracing potential routes. "The hydroelectric plant 40 miles north is still operational. I checked the satellite feeds we managed to intercept last month. If we could secure it, we'd have unlimited power and fresh water from the reservoir." And walked straight into a trap, Orion countered, his weathered face bearing the scars of too many close calls with both the undead and hostile survivors. "Every group within 100 miles knows about that plant. We'd be fighting for it within days of arrival." Zara's gentle voice cut through the tension. "People are starting to get sick again. The children especially. Malnutrition, stress, infections that I can't properly treat with our limited supplies. We need a permanent solution, not another temporary hideout." The weight of leadership settled heavily on Kestrel's shoulders as she studied the faces of her chosen family. These people had followed her through hell, trusted her decisions when the world collapsed around them. They deserved better than the constant fear, the endless running, the gradual erosion of hope that came with mere survival. Through the window, she watched Marcus Brightwater teaching a group of children how to tend the garden, their laughter a precious sound in a world grown silent. Little Emma Shadowbrook, barely 5 years old, carefully watered seedlings with the same concentration a scholar might apply to ancient texts. These children had never known the world before, had grown up believing that zombies and scarcity were simply facts of existence. "There's something else," Bellamy spoke up, her young voice trembling slightly. "I've been monitoring the radio frequencies, like you taught me. There's been chatter about a place called Haven's Rest, somewhere in the mountains of Colorado. Multiple survivor groups mention it. They say it's organized, protected, growing." Caspian leaned forward, his eyes brightening with the first hope Kestrel had seen in weeks. "A real settlement? Not just another group of scavengers?" "That's what it sounds like," Bellamy continued, pulling out a notebook filled with her careful transcriptions. "They talk about farms, workshops, even a school. And they're actively recruiting other survivors, offering safe passage and resources to those who can contribute." The silence that followed was thick with possibility and fear in equal measure. Colorado was 800 miles away through territory crawling with the undead and worse, the living who had embraced brutality as their new religion. Yet the alternative was watching their community slowly wither away, losing members to disease, despair, or the inevitable moment when their defenses finally failed. Kestrel closed her eyes and made the decision that would define their future. "We leave in 3 days. Pack only what we can carry, destroy anything that might be useful to raiders. If Haven's Rest is real, we're going to find it. If it's not. She opened her eyes and met each gaze around the table. Then we'll build something better ourselves. The die was cast, and their journey toward an uncertain future would begin with the next sunrise. The evacuation began before dawn on the third day, 37 souls moving like ghosts through the mall they'd called home for 18 months. Kestrel watched from the upper level as families loaded their most precious possessions onto reinforced shopping carts and makeshift sleds. The weight of what they were leaving behind pressed against her chest like a physical thing, the gardens they'd cultivated, the defensive positions they'd perfected, the memories of those they'd lost and buried in the small cemetery behind the old Sears. Thane had worked through the night, rigging explosive charges throughout the mall's infrastructure. They couldn't risk leaving their haven intact for raiders or worse. The generators, water filtration systems, and stockpiled supplies would be reduced to rubble and ash within hours of their departure. Better to deny these resources to their enemies than chance them falling into the wrong hands. Zara moved between the families, checking on the sick and elderly who would make the journey most difficult. Old Willem Starweaver, recovering from pneumonia, insisted he could walk despite the bloody cough that racked his frame every few minutes. His granddaughter, Sage Moonbeam, barely 12 years old, hovered beside him with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd already lost too much. "The route takes us through Millbrook first," Orion announced, consulting his carefully annotated road atlas. "Small town, population maybe 3,000 before everything went to hell. Should be plenty of supplies if we're careful about the sweep." Bellamy looked up from her radio equipment, dark circles under her eyes from nights spent monitoring distant voices. "I intercepted something last night. A group calling themselves the Crimson Brotherhood. They've been hitting survivor settlements along Interstate 70, taking whatever they want and leaving the rest to die." The name sent a chill through the gathered survivors. They'd all heard whispers of the Brotherhood, former military personnel who'd embraced might makes right philosophy and carved out territory through violence and intimidation. Their reputation was built on stories of burned settlements and mass graves, of children taken as slaves and adults left crucified along roadsides as warnings. "How far out?" Kestrel asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "Maybe a week behind us if they're moving slow, 3 days if they're pushing hard. The radio chatter suggests they're tracking someone, but the signals are too weak to get details." Caspian hefted his worn hiking pack, his weathered hands checking the straps one final time. "Then we move fast and stay quiet. No unnecessary risks, no heroics. Our job is to get everyone to safety, not fight wars we can't win." As the sun crested the horizon, casting golden light through the mall's shattered skylights, the convoy began to move. Kestrel took point with Orion, their weapons ready but concealed beneath heavy coats. Behind them, the families moved in small groups, children walking between adults who scanned constantly for threats. The shopping carts' wheels had been wrapped in cloth to muffle sound, and strict noise discipline kept even the youngest quiet. The first mile passed without incident, their route taking them through residential neighborhoods where nature had begun reclaiming abandoned houses. Vines crawled up brick walls, and deer grazed peacefully in overgrown yards, signs that this area had been clear of both undead and human threats for some time. Then Bellamy's voice crackled through their radio headsets, barely above a whisper. "Movement ahead. 2 blocks north of the school. Looks like a small group, maybe 5 or 6 individuals." Kestrel signaled for the convoy to halt, families quickly taking cover behind abandoned cars and overgrown hedges. Through her binoculars, she could see the distant figures moving with purpose through the elementary school parking lot. Their clothing was too coordinated, their movements too disciplined to be ordinary survivors. "Scouts," Orion breathed beside her. "Professional ones. They're mapping the area, probably for a larger force." The realization hit Kestrel like ice water in her veins. The Crimson Brotherhood wasn't a week away, they were already here, already preparing to sweep through this region like a plague of locusts. Every settlement, every group of survivors would be catalogued, assessed, and either absorbed or eliminated according to their usefulness. "We can't go back," she whispered into her radio. "Thane, How long until the charges blow? 47 minutes, came the terse reply. Timer's already running. The explosion would send a signal visible for miles, announcing to anyone watching that their former haven was destroyed. But it would also draw attention, possibly bringing the Brotherhood's scouts running to investigate. They were trapped between the approaching threat and their own desperate gambit to deny resources to their enemies. Kestrel made the hardest decision of her life. We go around. Why detour through the industrial district, even if it costs us hours? Orion, take 3 volunteers and shadow those scouts. If they move toward our people, you stop them. Permanently. As the convoy melted into the maze of abandoned factories and warehouses, Kestrel caught sight of little Emma Shadowbrook clutching a stuffed rabbit, her young face serious with the kind of premature gravity that broke her heart. These children deserved better than this constant flight, this endless fear. If Haven's Rest was real, she'd move heaven and earth to get them there safely. Behind them, the mall that had been their sanctuary continued counting down to destruction, and ahead lay 800 miles of uncertainty through a landscape where death walked freely and humanity's worst impulses had been unleashed without restraint. 6 days into their journey, the convoy had covered nearly 200 miles through a landscape that seemed caught between seasons of death and rebirth. They moved primarily at night, navigating by star charts Caspian had taught them to read, sleeping in hidden camps during the dangerous daylight hours when both undead and hostile humans were most active. Thane had proven invaluable in selecting their rest stops, finding abandoned facilities with multiple exits and defensible positions. An old truck stop outside Millbrook had provided medical supplies and canned goods, while a deserted ranger station yielded detailed topographical maps and weather gear that would prove essential in the mountains ahead. Zara worked miracles with their limited medical supplies, treating everything from infected cuts to the persistent cough that plagued Willem Starweaver. The old man's condition had worsened despite her efforts, his breathing growing more labored with each passing day. His granddaughter Sage never left his side, helping him walk when his strength failed and sharing her own rations when he could barely eat. Radio contact ahead, Bellamy announced during their evening briefing, her equipment spread across a folding table in the abandoned farmhouse they'd chosen for the night. Clean signals, not the encrypted military chatter we've been avoiding. Someone's calling themselves the Midwest Alliance. Kestrel studied the girl's notes, written in her careful handwriting across multiple pages. The Alliance appeared to be a loose confederation of survivor settlements stretching from Kansas to Ohio, sharing resources and information while maintaining individual autonomy. Their broadcasts included weather warnings, safe routes between communities, and reports of hostile groups to avoid. They mention Haven's Rest, Bellamy continued, her voice carrying cautious excitement. Regular supply runs, trade agreements, even student exchanges between settlements. If this is real, we're not just looking for a place to hide anymore. We're looking for civilization. Orion returned from his evening patrol with disturbing news. Found fresh graves 2 miles north of here. Recent burials, maybe a week old. No markers, but the soil patterns suggest maybe 20 bodies. Could be disease, could be violence. The implications settled over their small council like a heavy blanket. 20 deaths in a small area suggested either a catastrophic illness or a massacre, both scenarios that threatened their own safety. Yet they couldn't afford to detour too far from their planned route, their supplies were calculated for a specific timeline, and winter weather in the mountains would make travel impossible if they delayed too long. We stick to the plan, Kestrel decided, though the words tasted bitter in her mouth. But we double the watch rotations and move with weapons ready. Whatever happened here, we won't be caught unprepared. As night fell and they prepared to resume their journey, Willem Starweaver collapsed during the loading process. Zara rushed to his side, her medical training evident in the swift efficiency of her examination. When she looked up, her expression confirmed what they all feared. His lungs are filling with fluid, she said quietly, professional composure barely masking her anguish. Without proper medical facilities, antibiotics I don't have. I'm sorry. Sage knelt beside her grandfather, tears streaming down her young face as she held his weathered hand. Willem's eyes, still bright with intelligence despite his failing body, found Kestrel's gaze across the crowded room. "Promise me," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the struggle for breath. "Promise me she'll see this haven's rest. Promise me she'll have the childhood, the future I couldn't give her." The words hit Kestrel like physical blows. Willem had been a professor before the apocalypse, teaching literature at a small college, nurturing young minds and believing in humanity's capacity for growth and beauty. He'd carried that faith through 3 years of horror, maintaining hope even as the world crumbled around him. "I promise," Kestrel said, her own voice thick with emotion. "She'll see it, Willem. She'll grow up free." Willem Starweaver died as the convoy prepared to move out, his last breath a sigh that seemed to carry away some essential part of their small community's soul. They buried him in a grove of oak trees behind the farmhouse, marking his grave with a simple stone cairn that would weather whatever storms lay ahead. Sage spoke at the brief service, her young voice steady despite her tears. "Grandpa Willem used to read me stories about brave people who never gave up, even when everything seemed hopeless. He said the stories mattered because they reminded us what we were fighting for. He said we were living in a story too, and it was up to us to make sure it had a good ending." As they resumed their journey under a canopy of stars, Kestrel carried the weight of her promise like a sacred trust. Somewhere ahead lay either salvation or another cruel disappointment, but she would not falter. Too many people depended on her strength, too many dreams rested on her shoulders. Behind them, the fresh grave marked another small tragedy in a world that had known too many, but ahead lay the possibility of something better. The radio chatter from the Midwest Alliance continued to paint pictures of communities that had not just survived but begun to thrive, settlements where children learned to read instead of just fight, where people planned for futures measured in decades rather than days. The convoy pressed on through the darkness, 36 souls bound together by loss, hope, and the unshakable belief that somewhere beyond the horizon, humanity was learning to live again. The ambush came at dawn on their 15th day, when exhaustion had made them careless and hope had made them bold. They'd been following a railroad track through rolling farmland, thinking the elevated position would give them better visibility and fewer chances for surprise attacks. Instead, it made them perfect targets for the 15 men who rose from concealed positions in the tall grass on both sides of the embankment. "Crimson Brotherhood," the leader shouted, his military bearing evident despite the patchwork of scavenged gear and crude tattoos that marked him as one of the wasteland's new breed of warlords. "You're in our territory now. Lay down your weapons and submit to processing, or we'll take what we want from your corpses." Kestrel's mind raced as she assessed their tactical situation. The Brotherhood soldiers held the high ground advantage she'd thought belonged to her convoy, with clear fields of fire and prepared positions. Her people were strung out along a quarter-mile of track with limited cover, families clustered around their precious possessions and elderly survivors who couldn't run if the shooting started. "What do you want?" she called back, buying time while Orion and his scouts moved into flanking positions they'd rehearsed dozens of times. The key to surviving these encounters was never appearing as helpless as you really were. "Standard processing," the leader replied, his tone suggesting this was routine business. "Healthy adults for labor conscription, technical specialists for our engineering corps, children for education programs. Non-productive individuals will be relocated to settlement facilities." The euphemisms chilled Kestrel's blood. She'd heard enough stories from other survivors to know what Brotherhood processing really meant: slavery for the strong, execution for the weak, and God only knew what horrors awaited the children in their education programs. Behind her, she could hear Sage Moonbeam whimpering softly, still grieving for her grandfather and now facing a fate that would mock every sacrifice he'd made to keep her free. Thane was slowly working his way toward the explosive charges he'd placed on the supply cart, ready to deny their resources to the Brotherhood even if it meant destroying their own survival chances. "You have 30 seconds to decide," the Brotherhood leader announced. "After that, we take whatever's left after the shooting stops." Kestrel raised her rifle, knowing it would signal the beginning of a battle they couldn't win through force alone. But sometimes the impossible became possible when people fought for something greater than their own survival. Sometimes desperate courage could overcome superior firepower and position. "Take cover," she screamed, diving behind the nearest railcar hulk as automatic weapons fire erupted from both sides of the embankment. The battle was chaos and terror compressed into minutes that felt like hours. Orion's scouts emerged from positions the Brotherhood hadn't anticipated, their coordinated fire disrupting the ambush's timing and creating pockets of confusion. Thane's explosives sent supply carts erupting in flames, denying resources while creating smoke screens that obscured movement. But training and equipment told in the end. Brotherhood soldiers moved with military precision, their weapons were better maintained, and their tactical communications allowed them to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. One by one, Kestrel's people fell, not all dead, but wounded, pinned down, or simply out of ammunition. Marcus Brightwater, the gentle teacher who'd shown children how to nurture life in their mall gardens, took 3 bullets while shielding little Emma Shadowbrook from a flanking attack. He died with dirt-stained hands that had coaxed food from concrete planters, his last act ensuring that innocence might survive another day. Zara fought like a woman possessed, her medical training giving her intimate knowledge of human anatomy that she turned to deadly purpose. But even her fierce determination couldn't overcome the mathematics of 15 against 36 when most of the 36 were children, elderly, or civilians with minimal combat experience. When Caspian Silverforge went down with a shattered leg, his weathered face pale with shock and pain, Kestrel knew they were beaten. The Brotherhood soldiers were closing in, their leader already calling for surrender while his men prepared restraints for the survivors they deemed worth keeping alive. That's when the horizon erupted in muzzle flashes. The Midwest Alliance convoy appeared like an answer to prayers no one had dared voice, 40 vehicles carrying over 100 fighters who'd been tracking the Brotherhood incursion for days. Their timing was perfect, their tactics professional, and their firepower overwhelming. Within minutes, the ambush had become a rout as Brotherhood soldiers found themselves caught between hammer and anvil. "Stay down until we give the all-clear," shouted a woman in Alliance colors, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Medical teams are moving up to treat your wounded." As the gunfire faded and Alliance soldiers secured the area, Kestrel found herself face-to-face with Commander Raven Stormhold, a weathered woman whose reputation had reached even their isolated mall community. The Alliance's most successful field commander was shorter than expected but carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd turned desperate situations into victories more times than she could count. "Kestrel Hartwell?" Commander Stormhold asked, extending a hand stained with gunpowder and blood. "We've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your radio operator's transmissions finally gave us a position fix." Bellamy looked up from her equipment, tears streaming down her face as she realized their desperate journey had been monitored by potential allies rather than just enemies. "You heard us?" "Every word," the commander replied with a slight smile. "Welcome to the Alliance." The Alliance Field Hospital was a marvel of organization and efficiency, medical tents arranged in precise rows with clean white sheets that seemed impossible in a world where soap was precious and antibiotics were worth their weight in gold. Zara moved between the wounded with Alliance medics, her own skills augmented by proper supplies and equipment she hadn't seen since the first months after the collapse. Caspian lay sedated on a proper medical table while surgeons worked to save his shattered leg, the bullet having done devastating damage to bone and tissue. His chances were better than they would have been in their makeshift mall clinic, but the injury would likely leave him permanently disabled in a world where physical ability often meant the difference between life and death. The Brotherhood's been systematically eliminating small survivor groups across 3 states, Commander Stormhold explained as she briefed Kestrel on the tactical situation. Their strategy is divide and conquer, hit isolated communities before they can organize effective resistance, then consolidate territory under their control. The intelligence maps spread across the command table painted a sobering picture of the region's power dynamics. Red zones marked Brotherhood territory, where survivors lived under brutal occupation or had been eliminated entirely. Green areas showed Alliance influence, communities that had joined the Confederation and enjoyed mutual protection. The vast yellow expanses in between represented contested ground where the future of human civilization would be decided. "Haven's Rest is real," Commander Stormhold continued, noting Kestrel's intense focus on the Colorado mountains. "But it's more than just a settlement. It's become the de facto capital of the Western Alliance, a coalition of communities that's been rebuilding infrastructure and civil society on a scale we haven't seen since the government fell. Bellamy looked up from the advanced radio equipment Alliance technicians had provided, her eyes bright with wonder. They have universities again. Real schools, research facilities, even a functioning hospital complex. The radio traffic is incredible, they're coordinating supply chains across 6 states. The revelation was almost too much to process. For 3 years, Kestrel's world had shrunk to the immediate concerns of survival, finding food, avoiding threats, protecting their small community from day-to-day dangers. The idea that somewhere, people were thinking in terms of decades and generations seemed like fantasy. But getting there won't be easy, the commander warned. The route through Wyoming is controlled by a group calling itself the New Republic, and they're not friendly to refugees. Your best bet is the northern passage through Montana, but that means crossing Brotherhood territory and dealing with winter weather in the mountains. Thane limped over from the engineering tent where Alliance mechanics had been examining his improvised equipment with professional admiration. His leg wound was superficial, but the loss of Marcus Brightwater had hit him hard. The 2 men had worked together daily in the mall, sharing ideas and dreams about rebuilding civilization one small innovation at a time. "They want me to stay," he said quietly, his voice heavy with conflict. "The Alliance needs engineers, people who understand how to maintain complex systems with limited resources. They're offering me a position in their technical core, a chance to work on projects that could benefit thousands of people." The offer represented everything Thane had dreamed of, a return to meaningful work, the chance to use his skills for large-scale reconstruction rather than just keeping generators running for 36 survivors. But it also meant leaving the family he'd helped protect through 3 years of horror, abandoning the people who'd depended on his innovations and steady presence. "You should take it," Kestrel said, though the words cost her more than she wanted to admit. "This is what we've been fighting for, the chance for people to use their talents for something bigger than just staying alive another day." Sage Moonbeam approached their small group, her young face bearing the gravity that seemed endemic among children who'd grown up during the collapse. She'd been helping in the medical tents, her grandfather's lessons about compassion and service evident in her gentle care for the wounded. "Alliance doctors say they can treat the sickness that killed Grandpa Willem," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "They have medicines, equipment, things that could have saved him if we'd found them sooner." The statement hung in the air like an accusation, though Sage's tone held no blame. It was simply another reminder of the costs of their isolation, the price they'd paid for trying to survive alone instead of seeking larger communities that might have had resources to help. "I want to keep going to Haven's Rest," Sage continued. "Grandpa Willem made me promise to see the world he dreamed about, where children could learn and grow without being afraid all the time. But I think he would have wanted to help here too, to be part of something that could prevent other families from losing people the way we lost him." Commander Stormhold studied the young girl with obvious respect. "The Alliance always needs teachers, especially people who understand how to preserve knowledge and culture during hard times. Your grandfather's skills wouldn't be wasted here." As evening fell over the Alliance camp, Kestrel walked among her surviving people and realized that their small community was dissolving. Not through death or abandonment, but through success, they'd found something larger and better than what they'd built alone, opportunities for individual growth that served greater purposes. Dr. Elena Mistral, the Alliance's chief medical officer, had offered Zara a position in their research division, working on treatments for radiation sickness and the various plagues that had emerged in the aftermath of civilization's collapse. The chance to save lives on a regional scale rather than just patching wounds in their small group was everything she'd trained for before the world ended. Bellamy had been recruited by the Alliance Communications Corps, her skills with radio equipment and signal intelligence desperately needed for coordination between distant settlements. The young woman who'd guided them through the wasteland with intercepted messages now had the opportunity to become a vital link in humanity's reconstruction. Even little Emma Shadowbrook had found a place, adopted by an Alliance family who'd lost their own daughter to raiders 6 months earlier. The child who'd tended garden plants in a shopping mall would grow up in a community with real schools and playgrounds, safety and opportunity that Kestrel's group couldn't provide. One by one, the people she'd protected and led for 3 years were finding new purposes, better lives than she could offer. It should have been a victory, the fulfillment of every hope she'd carried through the dark times. Instead, it felt like dissolution, the end of something precious even if it had been born from desperation. Only 12 members of their original group chose to continue toward Haven's Rest, including Kestrel herself, Orion, and Commander Stormhold, who requested assignment to escort them through the dangerous territory ahead. The remainder would join the Alliance, contributing their skills to the growing Confederation while building new lives in communities that offered stability and purpose. The farewell ceremony was brief but emotional, 3 years of shared struggle reduced to final embraces and promises to stay in contact through Alliance communication networks. As the convoy prepared to leave at dawn, Kestrel realized that their journey had never really been about reaching a destination, it had been about finding hope, and hope took many different forms. Thane pressed a hand-drawn schematic into her palm, plans for a water purification system he'd designed for small communities. For Haven's Rest, he said simply. Something to contribute when you arrive. The paper felt like a blessing and a benediction, a reminder that even as their group scattered, the dreams they'd shared would continue in new forms. Somewhere ahead lay the final destination of their impossible journey, but behind them stretched a trail of people finding new purposes and better futures. It was, Kestrel realized, exactly what Willem Starweaver would have wanted, not the preservation of their small community, but its transformation into something larger and more meaningful. The story was changing, but it was still moving toward the ending he'd dreamed of for his granddaughter and all the children who deserved better than mere survival. Part 6. The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly before them, snow-capped peaks piercing a sky so blue it seemed like a promise of better things ahead. Their reduced convoy moved through terrain that grew more challenging with each mile, following game trails and abandoned logging roads that hadn't seen human traffic since the early days of the collapse. Commander Stormhold proved invaluable as both guide and protector, her knowledge of the region's geography matched by an uncanny ability to read the landscape for signs of danger. She'd spent 2 years mapping Brotherhood movements through these mountains, documenting their patrol patterns and supply routes with the methodical precision of a professional soldier. The New Republic maintains checkpoints along the main highways, she explained during their evening briefing, her finger tracing routes on a detailed topographical map. They're not openly hostile to travelers, but their idea of processing refugees involves mandatory relocation to labor camps. Better to avoid them entirely. Orion had taken naturally to the mountain environment, his hunting skills enhanced by the abundant wildlife that had returned to regions abandoned by human civilization. Deer grazed openly in meadows where towns once stood, and streams ran clean and cold, untainted by the industrial pollution that had once made them toxic. Nature was reclaiming the continent with remarkable speed, turning scars of human habitation into green spaces that suggested what the world might become if given enough time to heal. Their new group dynamic had stabilized around core competencies that maximized their chances of success. Kestrel remained the tactical leader, making strategic decisions about routes and risks. Commander Stormhold provided military expertise and regional knowledge. Orion served as scout and provisioner, keeping them fed and warned of approaching threats. The smaller numbers made them faster and harder to detect, though it also meant they had fewer people to handle emergencies or defend against serious attacks. Bellamy's replacement as communications specialist was Vesper Nighthawk, a teenage Alliance member whose technical skills rivaled those of pre-collapse specialists. She maintained contact with Alliance headquarters while monitoring New Republic and Brotherhood frequencies, providing early warning of hostile movement in their general area. Picking up some interesting chatter, Vesper reported on their 18th day in the mountains. New Republic forces are mobilizing for something big. Lots of encrypted traffic, equipment movement, references to something called Operation Shepherd. The name sent a chill through their small group. Military operations with pastoral codenames usually involve civilian populations in ways that didn't end well for the civilians. The New Republic's version of democracy had devolved into a form of authoritarian populism that viewed refugees and outsiders as threats to their carefully controlled society. How close are we to their territory? Kestrel asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. Commander Stormhold consulted her maps and GPS unit, one of the few still functioning after Alliance technicians had repaired its satellite connections. The buffer zone starts about 50 miles ahead. After that, we're in disputed territory for another 100 miles before reaching the Colorado border. The mathematics were sobering. At their current pace through difficult terrain, they were looking at 2 weeks of travel through areas where they might encounter New Republic patrols, Brotherhood raiders, or worse, the kind of desperate survivors who'd embraced cannibalism and other horrors as survival strategies. There might be another option, Vesper said hesitantly. I've been monitoring communications from something called the Underground Railroad. Not the historical one, obviously, but a network that helps refugees transit through hostile territory. They use safe houses, guides, forged documents. The possibility offered both hope and additional danger. Underground organizations attracted infiltrators and double agents, and the New Republic had proven adept at using captured refugees as bait to lure humanitarian groups into traps. But the alternative was trying to cross enemy territory alone, relying on stealth and luck to avoid forces that vastly outnumbered them. See if you can make contact, Kestrel decided. But be careful about revealing our position or capabilities. If this is legitimate, it could save us weeks of dangerous travel. If it's a trap. She didn't need to finish the sentence. They'd all seen enough betrayal and false hope to understand the risks of trusting strangers in a world where desperation made monsters of ordinary people. That night, as they camped in the ruins of an old mining town, Kestrel found herself thinking about the people they'd left behind with the Alliance. Were Thane and Zara adapting to their new roles? Had Sage found the education her grandfather had dreamed of? Was little Emma learning to laugh again in a place where children could be children instead of just small survivors? The satellite phone Commander Stormhold carried offered limited communication with Alliance headquarters, but personal messages were discouraged except in emergencies. The growing Confederation needed its communication bandwidth for coordination between settlements, not social calls between scattered friends. It was another reminder that the world they were building would necessarily be different from the one they'd lost, with new priorities and different definitions of essential contact. Thinking about the others? Commander Stormhold asked, settling beside the small fire they'd risked despite the potential visibility to hostile observers. Wondering if we made the right choice, Kestrel admitted. The Alliance offered everything we'd been looking for: safety, purpose, community. Maybe continuing toward Haven's Rest is just stubborn pride. The older woman smiled, her weathered face softened by firelight. I've been to Haven's Rest twice on diplomatic missions. It's everything the radio chatter suggests and more. But it's also something the Alliance isn't. It's proof that we can build something better than what we lost, not just recreate what existed before. The distinction was subtle but important. The Alliance represented practical reconstruction, the restoration of essential services and civil order that allowed people to survive and gradually thrive. Haven's Rest, according to reports, had moved beyond mere survival to something approaching Renaissance, communities where art and music flourished alongside agriculture and engineering, where children learned philosophy and poetry alongside practical skills. The world needs both approaches, Commander Stormhold continued. The Alliance provides stability and security, the foundation on which civilization can rebuild. Haven's Rest proves that civilization is worth rebuilding, that human culture can emerge from chaos more beautiful than before. As if summoned by their conversation, Vesper's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. The voice was female, young, and careful in the way that suggested someone accustomed to operating in dangerous territory. Convoy traveling north through Sector 7, this is Sanctuary Network. We've been monitoring your progress and would like to offer assistance. Reply on this frequency if you're interested in discussing passage options. Kestrel and Commander Stormhold exchanged glances across the fire. The moment of decision had arrived: trust strangers who might be their salvation or their doom, or continue alone through territory that promised equal dangers without the possibility of help. This is Convoy Leader Hartwell, Kestrel replied after a moment's hesitation. We're interested in discussing options. How do we proceed? The response came immediately, as if the speaker had been waiting for exactly that reply. Maintain current heading for 12 miles, then watch for 3 stacked stones marking a game trail to the east. Follow the trail to the old ranger station at Moonrise Lake. Someone will meet you there tomorrow at sunset. The transmission ended, leaving them with coordinates that could lead to rescue or ambush. Either way, their journey toward Haven's Rest was about to enter its most dangerous phase, where the wrong choice could end not just their mission but their lives. Part 7. The ranger station at Moonrise Lake sat like a monument to a more innocent time, its log construction and green-painted trim speaking of an era when the greatest danger visitors faced was getting lost on hiking trails. Now it served as a way station for human cargo moving through the underground networks that had emerged to help refugees navigate the fractured landscape of post-collapse America. Their contact proved to be a woman in her 40s named Aurora Wildwind, whose steady eyes and calloused hands marked her as someone who'd learned to thrive in the new world rather than just survive it. She moved through the station with easy familiarity, checking concealed weapons caches and communication equipment that suggested this wasn't a casual operation. The Sanctuary Network has been moving people through this region for 18 months, she explained as she spread detailed maps across the station's main table. We've got safe houses, supply caches, and guides who know every game trail and hidden valley between here and the Colorado border. The maps showed a complex web of routes marked in different colors according to threat levels and seasonal accessibility. Red lines indicated New Republic patrol zones, purple marked Brotherhood territory, and yellow showed areas where environmental hazards made travel dangerous regardless of human threats. Your timing is good and bad, Aurora continued, her finger tracing their projected route. Good because winter weather has closed most of the high passes, which means fewer patrols and more predictable enemy movements. Bad because Operation Shepherd kicked off 3 days ago, and the New Republic is conducting systematic sweeps of all refugee routes. Commander Stormhold leaned forward, her military experience evident in the questions she asked about patrol patterns and communication protocols. What's the objective of Operation Shepherd? Are they looking for specific targets or just general population control? Both, Aurora replied grimly. Intelligence suggests they're hunting for someone, a scientist or engineer with knowledge they want to acquire. But they're also using the operation as cover for mass relocations, clearing territory they want to claim permanently. The implications were sobering. Random refugees might be detained and processed through the New Republic's labor camps, but anyone with technical knowledge faced interrogation and forced conscription. Kestrel's group carried enough expertise to make them valuable prisoners rather than simple labor units. How do we avoid detection? Orion asked, his tactical mind already working through the challenges of moving through hostile territory with regular patrols. Aurora pulled out a different set of maps, these hand-drawn and annotated with notes about terrain features and seasonal conditions. Underground routes. Literally. There's an old mining complex that runs for 30 miles through the mountains, abandoned since the 1970s but still structurally sound. It'll get you past the main patrol zones without surface exposure. The idea of traveling through abandoned mines filled Kestrel with dread. 30 miles of underground passages meant 30 miles where a cave-in could trap them forever, where equipment failure could leave them lost in darkness, where any number of hazards might have accumulated during decades of abandonment. I know it's not ideal, Aurora said, reading her expression accurately. But it's safer than trying to cross 3 patrol zones and 2 Brotherhood checkpoints. The network has used these tunnels dozens of times without serious incident. Vesper looked up from her radio equipment, her young face troubled. I'm picking up increased communication traffic from New Republic forces. Sounds like they've found something, or someone, they were looking for. The encryption is too good for me to break, but the message volume suggests major developments. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Either the network had been compromised, or the New Republic's mysterious quarry was connected somehow to refugee movements through the region. Both possibilities suggested that their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. We need to move tonight, Commander Stormhold decided. If Operation Shepherd has achieved its primary objective, they'll shift focus to secondary targets. That includes any refugees they can sweep up for political purposes. Aurora nodded, her expression becoming more businesslike as operational planning took precedence over theoretical discussions. I'll guide you through the first section of tunnels personally. After that, you'll have maps and radio frequencies for emergency contact with our network. The entire underground route should take 3 days if you maintain steady progress. As they prepared their equipment for underground travel, Kestrel found herself thinking about the chain of decisions that had brought them to this moment. Each choice had seemed logical in context, leaving the mall when it became untenable, accepting Alliance assistance when they faced the Brotherhood ambush, continuing toward Haven's Rest instead of joining the Confederation. Now they were trusting their lives to strangers in abandoned mine shafts, gambling everything on the hope that somewhere ahead lay something worth these enormous risks. Second thoughts? Commander Stormhold asked quietly as they checked their gear one final time. Constantly, Kestrel admitted. But the alternative is giving up, and I made too many promises to quit now. The truth was more complex than she wanted to acknowledge. Part of her drive toward Haven's Rest had become personal rather than practical, a need to prove that their original vision was achievable, that small communities could build something beautiful without being absorbed into larger organizations. The Alliance offered security and purpose, but Haven's Rest promised something more elusive, the possibility that human civilization could emerge from catastrophe transformed rather than merely restored. As they entered the mine complex that evening, following Aurora through passages carved from living rock by forgotten workers, Kestrel carried with her the hopes and dreams of everyone they'd left behind. Somewhere in the darkness ahead lay either vindication or disaster, the proof that their impossible journey had been worth every sacrifice or the final confirmation that some dreams were too ambitious for a broken world. The tunnels stretched before them like arteries in some vast underground circulatory system, promising passage to a destination that remained more faith than fact. 3 days through stone and shadow, then whatever waited beyond the Colorado border, either the Renaissance community that justified every risk they'd taken, or another disappointment in a world that had already provided too many. Behind them lay 36 people who'd found new purposes with the Alliance, ahead lay 12 who continued toward an uncertain future. Both groups carried forward the memory of Willem Starweaver and Marcus Brightwater, of all the small sacrifices that had made this moment possible. The story was still being written, and its ending remained unresolved. Part 8. The tunnels had been a journey through the bones of the earth, 3 days of careful navigation through passages that seemed to whisper with the voices of long-dead miners. When they finally emerged into Colorado sunlight, the mountain air tasted like freedom and possibility. Behind them lay the New Republic's search zones and the Brotherhood's territory, ahead stretched the final 100 miles to Haven's Rest. The landscape had changed subtly as they traveled west, evidence of human activity becoming more sophisticated and organized. Solar panels glinted on rooftops of occupied buildings, roads showed signs of recent maintenance, and radio traffic carried the casual efficiency of people conducting normal business rather than desperate survival operations. There, Commander Stormhold said, pointing toward a valley where smoke rose from multiple chimneys and the geometric patterns of agricultural fields created a patchwork of green and brown across the mountainside. That's Harmony Ridge, one of Haven's Rest's satellite communities. If the reports are accurate, we should find representatives who can escort us the final distance. The settlement looked like something from a half-remembered dream of what America might have been, houses with actual glass windows, children playing in fenced yards, people moving with the unhurried confidence of those who didn't expect violence around every corner. After 3 years of ruins and wasteland, the sight of genuine civilization was almost overwhelming. Their approach had been monitored, they realized, when a delegation of riders met them 2 miles from the settlement's perimeter. The welcoming committee was led by a woman whose bearing suggested both authority and the kind of calm competence that came from successfully managing complex challenges. Kestrel Hartwell, she asked, extending a hand in greeting. I'm Director Meadow Starfall from Haven's Rest Council. We've been following your progress through Alliance communications. Welcome to Free Colorado. The words carried weight that went beyond simple courtesy. This wasn't just a settlement or even a collection of settlements, it was a functioning regional government with diplomatic relations, communication networks, and the confidence to claim territorial sovereignty. The implications were staggering for people who'd spent years thinking in terms of scavenged meals and daily survival. "We have much to discuss," Director Starfall continued as their small convoy was escorted toward Harmony Ridge. "Your journey has taken you through territory we need to understand better. The Alliance has shared some intelligence, but first-hand observations from experienced travelers are invaluable." The settlement itself exceeded even their most optimistic expectations. The main street bustled with activity that seemed impossible in their changed world, merchants displaying goods that weren't just scavenged artifacts but actual manufactured items, children attending an actual school in an actual building with actual books, craftspeople working with tools and materials that suggested supply chains extending far beyond immediate survival needs. But it was the small details that struck Kestrel most powerfully. Flower boxes on windowsills. A musical performance in the town square where a young woman played violin while people gathered simply to listen and enjoy. An elderly man teaching a group of children to carve wood not because they needed tools urgently but because craftsmanship was worth preserving. "How?" was all she could manage to ask. Director Starfall smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd helped build something extraordinary. Organization, cooperation, and the refusal to accept that civilization was permanently lost. Haven's Rest started with 50 families who made a simple decision: we wouldn't just survive, we'd live. We'd educate our children, preserve knowledge, create beauty, and prove that humanity could learn from its mistakes. As they toured the settlement, the scope of the achievement became clear. This wasn't just a successful survivor community, it was a functioning society with specialized roles, cultural institutions, and long-term planning. The school offered instruction in history and literature alongside practical skills. The medical facility rivaled pre-collapse rural hospitals. The workshops produced everything from furniture to electronics using locally sourced materials and renewable energy. The network extends across 6 states now, Director Starfall explained as they visited the communication center where operators maintained contact with dozens of affiliated communities. Trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, student exchanges, joint research projects. "We're rebuilding civilization from the ground up, but building it better this time." Orion had found his way to the settlement's security office, where professional guards maintained watch over approaches and communication with other defensive networks. Their equipment was impressive but not intimidating, the tools of people who prepared for trouble but didn't expect it to be their primary occupation. "They want me to help establish a training program," he told Kestrel during their evening briefing. "Not just for combat, but for the kind of community policing that keeps people safe without creating military states." Commander Stormhold had been invited to meet with Haven's Rest military advisors, comparing notes on regional threats and collaborative defense strategies. The Alliance and Haven's Rest maintained cordial relations, she learned, with regular diplomatic exchanges and shared intelligence about Brotherhood movements and New Republic expansion. "They're offering formal alliance terms," she reported. "Military cooperation, trade agreements, communication protocols. The Alliance Council will be very interested in these proposals." As night fell over Harmony Ridge, Kestrel found herself walking the settlement streets with a sense of wonder that she'd thought permanently lost. These weren't desperate survivors huddling together for protection, these were citizens of a functioning society, people who planned for decades ahead and believed their children would inherit something better than ruins. In the town square, she discovered a memorial wall listing names of people who'd died during the Reconstruction years, not just from violence or disease, but from accidents, old age, and the ordinary tragedies that affected any human community. The inscription above the names read, "They built tomorrow with their hands and hearts. Their dreams live in our children." Willem Starweaver would have loved this place, she realized. The professor who died believing in stories with good endings would have recognized Haven's Rest as the fulfillment of his faith in human potential. His granddaughter Sage, now safely enrolled in Alliance schools, would grow up in a world where such communities were becoming normal rather than miraculous. "So what happens now?" Vesper asked as their small group gathered for their final council meeting. The young woman had been offered positions in Haven's Rest communication networks, opportunities to help expand the infrastructure that connected these islands of civilization across the wasteland. Now we choose, Kestrel replied, looking around at the faces of people who'd followed her through 800 miles of danger and uncertainty. We've found what we were looking for. The question is whether we stay to be part of it or carry the message back to others who need to know it exists. The decision wasn't difficult for most of them. Orion and Vesper would remain to contribute their skills to Haven's Rest expansion. Commander Stormhold would return to the Alliance with diplomatic proposals and intelligence about Western territories. Several others had already found niches where their particular abilities would serve the greater community. Kestrel herself faced the hardest choice. She'd accomplished her mission, found Haven's Rest, proven it was real, ensured her people had reached safety. But leadership had never been her goal, only her necessity. In a place where systems worked and civilization functioned, her particular skills were less essential. 2 weeks later, as she prepared to depart with a Haven's Rest diplomatic mission bound for Alliance territories, Kestrel received a radio message that changed everything. Sage Moonbeam's voice crackled through the static, young but determined. "Miss Kestrel? I've been learning about the communities that haven't been found yet, places where people are still struggling like we were. The Alliance wants to organize relief missions, but they need people who understand what it's like to lead survivors through impossible situations. Would you consider coming back to help them?" The request was perfect, offering purpose that built on her experience while serving the larger cause of reconstruction. She would become a bridge between struggling communities and the civilizations that could help them, a guide for people making the same desperate journey she'd completed. As she looked back at Harmony Ridge one final time, Kestrel carried with her the proof that impossible dreams could become reality when people refused to accept that better things weren't possible. Somewhere behind her lay the Alliance territories where Thane built water purification systems and Zara developed treatments for post-collapse diseases. Somewhere ahead lay communities still struggling in isolation, not yet knowing that help and hope were available. The story Willem Starweaver had believed in was becoming real, one settlement and one rescued community at a time. America was healing, not by returning to what it had been but by becoming something better, a collection of communities that valued cooperation over competition, sustainability over exploitation, and human dignity over mere survival. The radio crackled with messages from across the continent as evening fell, voices of people building tomorrow with their hands and hearts, their dreams living in children who would inherit a world transformed by tragedy into something more beautiful than before. The collapse was ending, the Renaissance had begun. In the distance, mountains caught the last light of day, their peaks promising new horizons for a species that had learned to dream again.